Hey everybody, thanks again for joining us for another edition of Advancement Live. My name is Ryan Catherwood and I am coming to you live from the grounds of the University of Virginia here in Charlottesville, Virginia. For those of you who might be joining us for the first time, thank you so much. Advancement Live airs twice a month on the second and last Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Advancement Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, which is a series of professional development web shows. Also podcasts, which you may be familiar with already, but if you have not listened to the podcast, you can download the app from iTunes or go to higheredlive.com and do the same. Be part of our broadcast, of course, by tuning in live to the back channel. If you use the hashtag HigherEdLive during the course of the broadcast, we will be monitoring that, and you can ask questions to our panelists today. And finally, be sure to subscribe to the Higher Ed Live newsletter by going to the higheredlive.com website. Let me begin the show by introducing our excellent sponsors. iModules is one of our fantastic sponsors, and they have their annual user conference called Sizzler, which is a 3-day event for networking, sharing, and learning industry best practices, and you can join over 500 higher education professionals representing more than 225 organizations. That conference is coming up the end of July, July 27th through the 30th in Overland Park. And also, a sponsor of Advancement Live are our good friends at M. Stoner. The show is produced by M. Stoner, in fact, which is a marketing and communications firm that works with educational institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. And so it is without further ado that I introduce my fantastic panelists today on a great show that is all about reunions. And for almost all of us, reunions are a hugely important signature event that is perhaps the weekend on the calendar for almost all of our institutions. Today we're going to focus on some interesting ideas when it comes to marketing and communication, getting folks to register for events, how volunteers can be infused into the mix, as well as what makes a great reunion program. So my first guest that I'd like to introduce to you is Jenna Webb, and she is at Colgate University. Beginning July 1, Jenna Webb will be serving as the Director of Alumni Relations. Jenna is a 2002 graduate of Colgate and has worked for her alma mater for 4 years, leading reunion preparations, supervising staff, and building online engagement programs. In her new role, she will be expanding to assume some of the day-to-day operations of the Alumni Relations Office, which includes budget and staff and programs. Jenna, how are you this fine day?
I'm doing well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the program. You know, I actually attended my 10-year reunion a couple years ago, and one of the things I loved the best about the experience was the opportunity to stay in the dorms. I felt like that was one of the highlights, and it really waking up on a dorm bed after having had too much to drink the night before. I mean, I feel like that is the crux of the reunion experience. How did you and your team, and you guys do that at Colgate, how do you and your team make the decision to have guests stay in the dorms, and what are some of the logistical hurdles in order to make that happen?
Sure. Well, I would say one of the biggest reasons that we do open up our dorms on campus for our guests to stay is our location. Colgate is located in Hamilton, New York. It's a very, very small rural town, so our hotel options, bed and breakfast options, are very limited. So in order to really have and allow for maximum capacity for people to attend, we have to have local options for people to stay. So our hotels fill up, bed and breakfasts fill up, a lot of folks rent out their homes, but really a lot of people stay on campus. So we utilize pretty much all of our on-campus residential facilities.
I'm sure it's an amazing operation to get all the administrative components organized. And I know that's one of your colleagues does that. What are some of the tasks that she has to work through?
Well, I would say first one of the big hurdles that we have to deal with is that, you know, the semester ends, so the academic year ends. Our facilities team has to come through, go through all of those residential facilities, clean them up, take any ones that might be damaged or need repair, take those offline. We also, so after the semester ends, we open all of those dorm facilities for parents to stay in for commencement. So all of those spaces are filled, and then 2 weeks later, facilities has to turn those all around for reunion. So it's quite the busy turnaround time. It's very quick, and we're thankful to have such a great team that's able to do that for us. And some of the hurdles that we do have to deal with are we have any sort of damage to the residence halls, where we end up finding out that some of those halls might be or some rooms might be taken offline and that we're not able to use. Colgate also has, I think, around 300 or so students that stay on campus every summer for research, athletic reasons, or maybe international students that can't go home. So we do have some housing that we're not able to use because they are being used for students that are staying over the summer. So that's another thing where we're limited with what we can provide to people.
And so one of the challenges, of course, when you're arranging that kind of a housing situation is you'd like to ideally arrange for the different reunion years to be together in the different dorms. Is that sort of something that you guys work on, and are events specific to those classes arranged in close proximity to those relevant dorms?
Well, one of the things we do is, like you had mentioned, we have one staff member that does focus on our housing. We try to honor all requests for where people would like to stay. We have folks that request to stay in certain dorms, folks that request to stay in proximity to their friends, or in their fraternity or sorority houses. So we really try to honor all of those requests. We look to put families in apartments so that it's a little bit more space. They have kitchens and things like that should they need to store food for children. But really, one of the big things is we're on a hill, so a lot of the reunion activities are down at the bottom of the hill. Classes and reunion college sessions are at the top of the hill. So the big thing that we always try to do is we try to make sure that our older classes, or the folks that might not be able to walk up and down the hill or get up and down the hill as easily, we keep them housed in the dorms that are located right near Whitnall Field, so that it's easier for them to go back and forth between reunion festivities and their housing.
And I have to imagine there's probably a few golf carts cruising around well during the course of your reunion weekend.
Yeah.
And looking at your website before we had the chance to chat, and then during our pre-show call, Jenna, we talked a lot about your huge program of events. I mean, you guys really have a substantial opportunity for alums to engage and go to different things all through the course of the weekend. One of those particular items is alumni speakers. Can you talk a little bit about how alumni speakers are selected to speak at class events?
Sure. That's something that we call a reunion college program. So we basically have probably anywhere from 50 to 60 programs. Presenters range from faculty, staff, and alumni. And we try to offer a really diverse program for all attendees, so that there's something that everyone can find and attend that piques their interest. We look to go to our faculty members that are, alumni favorites. They are doing very interesting research. Our admissions topics, those are always hot items, so we look to them and extend invitations to them. But then when it comes to our alums, we look for suggestions from account executives, from our volunteers, program chairs, and then we try to take into account what's out there, what those suggestions are, anyone that we know, and we try to make sure, like I said, that we offer a diverse program. We want to try to cover everything from athletics to art to science. We have visualization lab showings, presentations on research, documentary screenings. So we really try to offer a lot, and we also try to look to make sure that we have all of the reunion class years represented as well. We want to make sure that everyone from the 5th reunion attendees all the way up to the 50th and 60th have the option to go and see one of their classmates speak.
And then, like most reunions also have some, we'll call them standard or signature events that are there almost every year. These are really the crowd pleasers, if you will. What are some of the events that are standard on your program, and why do you guys keep them around?
Sure. Well, we have, a lot of standard things, and I'm sure that other universities have things like this as well. Things like an awards ceremony, parades, things, barbecues, all banquets and things like that are specific and enjoyable to various classes. But what we like to do is we like to try to find things that are unique to Colgate that attendees can really enjoy. One of the things we have is we have our torchlight procession. That's something that that is held every year at commencement. So our graduates process down the hill from the Colgate Chapel and end at a big bonfire where they're all carrying torches. So we offer that at reunion, and that's something that our attendees really enjoy. We also have a parade on Saturday morning, and that's something that really within the past couple of years we've moved it down into the village. So that's something that our older alums really love, the tradition of walking together down Oak Drive as a class. And then it also gets people into the village. So it's really, after the parade, the village is just bustling with activity. There's farmers market. People are going to check out all of the businesses. So it's really enhanced town relations when everybody's in town. We also, we have our awards ceremony. That's something that we really enjoy, being able to honor and appreciate our alums that have dedicated years of service and commitment to the university. And it also allows us to thank and appreciate staff and faculty for their service as well. And then another thing that we have that's very special every year is our 50th reunion memorial service. That's something that's, we work very closely with volunteers from the 50th reunion, and it's a really nice moment for the class to all gather and remember those in their class who have passed away. It's a very touching service that we have right before their class photo and their parade.
Great. And we had talked a little bit about your actual physical program, your almost your weekend guide, if you will. And it is, of course, as if you have all these events, you have to have an extensive program guide. What are some of the processes that you guys go through creating the program from a design standpoint? And then who's there making updates along the way? And is there a corresponding web listing to all of that?
Sure. So one of the things that we do, and I'll be sitting down with folks in communications later this summer. We have a great relationship with our communications team. So they're the ones that actually put the printed materials together. But we have a timeline that we prepare with them in the late summer that kind of organizes and lays out all of our printed marketing pieces with the conclusion of that timeline being the printed program. So we know when we need to get information and data to them so that it can be turned around and printed in time. So that's how that is done. They have their team that then designs, the cover, the logos, anything that goes inside. But in terms of the actual management of the data, that's somebody on our staff who is managing all of those Reunion College sessions. We have all of that information. Any sort of standard events that we have, general information that needs to be included in the booklet, all of our volunteer names. We compile all of that listing together, and we share that with our communications team once we set everything into the schedule, and then they work it into a printed document. And so we have a deadline as to when things need to officially go to print. So there is that cutoff of when we can no longer make changes, but that is where we utilize our online program. Our reunion site is available at colgate.edu/reunion, and so that's something where folks can go and take a look at the program that is current and update. They can look at that throughout the weekend. And then we also include an addendum that if there are any changes, additions, or cancellations, or revisions to times that we include in our registration packet as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us on Advancement Live today, and congratulations on your promotion there at Colgate. I think if you're in the alumni relations business, then it is a pretty cool thing to be running the shop at your alma mater. And so thank you very much. And introducing my next guest, that notion of running your own shop at your alma mater runs true with my next guest, Lisa Lee. Lisa has served as the Director of Alumni Relations at Swarthmore College, her alma mater, for almost 14 years now. Prior to Swarthmore, she was the graduate admissions at Duke University Fuqua School of Business, and then the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and then the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She holds a Master's of Education from Boston University. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. And in our pre-show call, we talked a little bit about your communication strategy, getting folks to the awareness factor built up in advance of the event. And one of the things that you guys deployed was the use of a hashtag well in advance of reunion weekend. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, and did it really spark the digital engagement that you were looking for?
Sure, it did. So this year is Swarthmore's sesquicentennial, so it's our 150th birthday. So we decided well in advance that we wanted a hashtag that could be used for all sesquicentennial events, and that's SWAT150. And so what that meant was by the time reunion arrived, our alums had been seeing that hashtag for 6 months already, so it meant there was some familiarity. And then once they arrived on campus, we had signs and with the hashtag and encouraging people to share their photos and their memories with the hashtag. So yes, it was very useful for us.
Fantastic. And as you alluded to, this was your sesquicentennial reunion, which is a very difficult thing to say.
Yes, you have to practice a lot.
Practiced it, yeah. And so I actually practiced a few times before our segment. So how did this milestone year for you guys impact your event marketing strategy when it came to the emails and the social media? Obviously, you put together a sort of specialized package for this year.
We did, and one of the reasons for that is that the sesquicentennial, we took the opportunity for the sesquicentennial to have an all-alumni reunion weekend. And we always invite all of our alums, but this year we really wanted people from all class years to come. And as it happens, we ended up with 72 different years represented. We ended up with 1,000 more people than we've ever had before on campus for reunions. So that was a big driver in our marketing. One of the things that meant was that people who were in non-milestone classes, who, as I said, do sort of get invited every year, we needed to really reach out and sort of explain to them this really was for them. We really meant for them to attend. So that was a big piece of our marketing, and as part of that, we put together online a couple of things. We put a section called Why I Come Back with alumni stories. We put a top 10 list of reasons to come back, one of which was this is your opportunity to see people, not just from your friends, not just from your class, but the years before, the years after that you know and you don't always see at reunion weekend. And once those were put together, we used them heavily in our email marketing. We used them in our tweets. We used them as part of a draw. And it was something that our volunteers could use as we reach out to them to encourage people to attend. So we had, not only the regular activity volunteers for the milestone reunions, but we reached out to volunteers from non-milestone reunions and to the 500 current and former alumni council members. And they had those as talking points and things they could send out on social media. We also, because it was our sesquicentennial, we're able to use some things that have been put together for that. So we have a timeline, we have interesting facts, we have a list of rules of conduct that a much earlier president had put together, and those are things that we were able to share within our marketing that weren't specific to reunion, but were about Swarthmore and Swarthmore memories that we could use as we started putting things together.
Yeah, exciting time for you guys. And then, of course, everyone arrives. And you have a university full of revelers, and there is an additional marketing and communication strategy that happens during the course of the actual event, while the event is happening. Can you talk about a little bit what you guys did in order to provide an engagement opportunity during the event?
Certainly. Well, one of the things that we did is we used a social media aggregate that was called SWAT Social, and that was created by one of our young alums named Joel Price, and he is in our information technology office, and he put this together, and it aggregates in a really nice visual way all of the different places where photos are posted and tweets are going out with the hashtag SWAT150, and so we were able, and that's live, so we were able to show that in our registration lobby, so people could watch as they were going through, and that created some energy for them to go out and post their photos. There you go. You can see a couple of our reunion workers. That's the lobby where people are registering. So that's one of the things we can do. That is flexible. It's customizable. We used it for Alumni Weekend, but you could just as easily use it for something for admissions or some other part of the campus if you wanted to do that. In addition to that, the folks in communications who were everywhere over the course of the weekend doing a fabulous job, and they started strategizing really early about what their plan was, and they decided that they really wanted to flood the campus with tweets, that they wanted to get a lot of enthusiasm go that way, but they also wanted to be involved in Instagram, to be involved in Facebook, but on a much smaller scale. They didn't want to flood everyone's feeds with that. So they limited the photos that they put on Instagram and Facebook to a small number that they thought would be particularly meaningful to alums, and then they had a lot more activity on Twitter, and then they retweeted and they resent things, and they went out to each of the key events, to in any sort of primary events, and then they came back together over the course of the weekend every 2 hours to talk about what they'd seen and to give content for whichever platform each of them was working on that they could share via their platforms. And then they go away again, come back 2 hours later, so that they could be very consistent about that.
That's amazing, and it makes a lot of sense. When you were analyzing which of the platforms seemed to get the most traction, I know that you mentioned Instagram perhaps used a little bit less than Twitter, which was used quite a bit more, both in advance of the event and then during the reunion weekend itself. Did you notice any patterns, and what was traffic like as you were driving it to your website?
Sure. Well, what I was talking about there was the traffic we actually put out on those websites, and we made a decision to do less. But I think all of them were active. We went well above our expectations. We had 72 photos posted on Instagram that alums posted with the hashtag. We had 133 tweets with the hashtag, and sort of what we were particularly pleased about with that was that there were 53 different alums included in that number, most of whom had not been involved in our social media platform before. The most popular photo that we had that was liked and retweeted was a photo of a woman from the class of 1934 celebrating her 80th reunion, and she led the parade. So she's 100 years old. She led our parade, and that's the one that got the most likes and the one that sort of got passed around the most. The one that seems to be the one that our alums took the most photos of and shared themselves was a photo of our 150th birthday cake on Sunday morning. So we were pretty pleased at the number of people who reached out and followed our program.
I bet that was a pretty special birthday cake. 150 years. It has to be pretty grand. So that's great. Those are great numbers, Lisa. And a lot of the, in the aftermath of any reunion, you're trying to think about some of the things that were the most successful. And based on sort of your accounts, what were those things? And perhaps do you have some recommendations for viewers watching the show as far as tips that might help them with their own communication strategy?
I think part of that was the fact that communications worked starting so very early. They engaged with us. We talked about what it is that we wanted to particularly highlight, particularly celebrate, and then they took that and ran with it. And so I think the preparation makes a huge difference. Anyone who's been at a reunion knows that it's just craziness. There's so many different activities happening all the time, and if you don't have a plan for it, it's easy to get distracted. And so I think that was really immensely important for us. We, as most schools, always use volunteers, and that's important to us as well. I think one of the things we learned this year was the power of volunteers who aren't necessarily in reunion years, but in particularly our closest volunteers, like our former council members, who, partly because they're very tightly connected to us and partly because it was such an important reunion year, milestone reunion for the college, who took the time to actually come in a year that wasn't necessarily their own milestone and bring people with them and encourage people to come with them. So the use of volunteers was important for us, and we sort of did that a little bit differently this year. And I guess going back to something from earlier, the programming question in terms of making sure all of your different classes are represented. We've often had a lot of smaller class-based activities over the course of the weekend, and because of the volume we were expecting and the number who weren't going to be in milestone years, we built more programming like a panel on social activism, which is a topic very important to our alumni, that used alums from the class of 2004 back to the class of 1974. And we built a cabaret on Saturday evening that had a jazz singer from 1969 all the way back to a young alum from 2011. And so that meant we had audiences because we had all of the years in between. It helped us to build a good enthusiasm and energy in the audience. And so that part of the programming was important for us.
Fantastic. And thanks, Lisa, for joining us, and congrats on what was obviously a great and successful reunion season with your sesquicentennial.
Thanks for having me.
The 150th. Thank you very much. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce my third guest this afternoon, Ashley Weeks-Cart of Williams College. Ashley Weeks-Cart graduated from Williams in 2005 with her BA in Art and Gender Studies. She holds a master's degree from the University of Southern California in Public Art Studies. She worked for Goucher College in campus life and for the city of Ventura out in California as an event planner before working at Williams in 2010 as the Associate Director of Alumni Relations and the Director of Classes and Reunions. Kind of far apart, Ashley, University of Southern California and Ventura, California, from your beautiful spot up in New England.
Yes. I needed some time on the West Coast before I could come home to Massachusetts, but we're glad to be back.
Great. And in our pre-show call, we talked a little bit of the fact that one of the distinguishing factors about Williams College, and something that Lisa alluded to, was that that reunions are almost made much more successful when they're driven by volunteers, and that is a very important factor at Williams College. What does that mean specifically for you guys? What's a volunteer-driven reunion?
So we run a quinquennial reunion program, so that's every 5 years you come back to celebrate reunion, and typically that ranges from the 5th to the 70th reunion. We actually have separate offices that staff the 25th and 50th reunions, so I don't have to worry about them. There's teams that do that work, so I'm worrying about the 5th through 70th reunions, excluding the 25th and 50th. And the reason I'm able to work with that volume of classes is largely because they are planned and executed by volunteers that I'm working closely with, but that are doing the majority of the planning for their class. So these are people that have either been class officers, or the class officers have helped identify as somebody who would, thrive in an event planning capacity, because my volunteers are not only communicating to their class, helping come up with class-specific schedules. They're on the phone with caterers. They're figuring out meals. They're working with budgets. They're ordering class gifts. They're doing all of the heavy lifting for their class, and I serve is the support in that, obviously, and somebody who can provide feedback and guidance. But really, it is their work that makes it possible to have essentially 14 reunions happening simultaneously on campus.
And I think that's an amazing feat, right? To have all of those reunions that are largely planned by volunteer alums. But of course, there's some challenges associated with taking that approach, and one of them is perhaps a challenge of training. And I think what you mentioned, that you actually have a volunteer training weekend. Could you talk a little bit about that weekend and some of the components?
Yes, so in September, we gather together the 5th through the 45th reunion. So my post-50th classes I work with in a different capacity, so I'll leave that to the side for now. But I gather together, again, I reach out to, over the summer, and actually send a save a date to those classes, again, the 5th through 45th reunion classes, early in the new year, letting them know the date for this planning weekend, and reach out again to the class officers to let them know that I'd love for them to attend, and if there are people in the class that they know either want to help support the reunion planning efforts for their class, or that the officers think they should encourage to support it, to reach out to them and let them know the date. So it's a Saturday in September that I bring them to campus, and we do kind of a big training session in the morning with me going over the overview for the program and how our reunion program works, the pieces that they'll be responsible for as reunion chairs for their class, the things that I'm responsible for, and how we work together. Everything from communication strategies to determining class gifts to where their headquarters will be on campus, because we headquarter each class depending on which reunion year they're in various parts of campus. And then we have breakout sessions where the classes, break out on their own and can actually begin the planning process. I circulate with my assistant, and we kind of talk them through what they're thinking about. And I can also speak to some of the class-specific or I should say reunion cycle specific realities, because I think there's definitely a culture to say the 5th reunion versus the 35th reunion or the 15th reunion. So I get an opportunity to speak to what the culture is for a 5th reunion versus, speaking to that for the 45th reunion, and how those things differ and what they should be focused on or thinking about. And so it's a good opportunity also just for them to have some face-to-face contact with me. It makes our planning process much smoother than for the rest of the year. I'm a known entity. They know they can pick up the phone and call me or shoot me an email. And then they're, well-equipped kind of moving forward with the process. I obviously am checking in with them throughout, but at least that's a good first touch point to kind of kick the planning into high gear.
And one of the things that I was perusing your website and noticed that tremendous parade of classes that you guys have, like Jenna mentioned, that's a big tradition that you guys have to kick off perhaps the weekend itself. And you've been at Williams for 5 years now, so you're a graduate, so you've had a chance to watch all of those classes take on the parade. And you mentioned in the last response that you have sort of a sense as to what makes a successful reunion for the various years, and present those models for the volunteers to go by. Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little bit about what makes a 15-year reunion perhaps different than a 30-year reunion or a 5th-year reunion? What makes one more successful than the other?
Yeah, I think it's just the stages of life that people are in at these various milestones. So your 5th-year reunion, we're getting over 50% of the class to come back. It is usually mostly singles or recently married or engaged folks coming back, not many children, a lot of them looking to kind of relive their college experience. And so they want to have late night parties, they want to have late night dances, they don't care about babysitters and child activities. So that's one very specific set of interests and needs, versus the 15th year reunion is our lowest attended reunion. And if you think at where people are at in their lives, kind of in their mid-30s, at the peak of career, at an age where their kids are, for the most part, kind of in their elementary school years, and travel can be difficult and expensive to move that many bodies. We get the lowest attendance rate for that reunion, I think, because logistically it is complicated from both a personal life and a work life perspective. And also they care very much at that stage, even though obviously not everybody has children or has families, enough of them do that it is very important to be thinking about kids' activities and gifts for kids when they're checking in, and babysitting and family accommodations and things like that. So those are things that group of volunteers are having to think about that the 5th year isn't. And then you move on to, say, the 40th or the 45th, and more people are empty nesters at that stage. Many are moving towards retirement or have more flexibility in their work because they're well established in their careers, and so they're coming up earlier. They want to do class dinners on not just Friday and Saturday, but Thursday night too. So again, it's thinking about, and it's really reflective of, again, in general, obviously these are huge generalizations and there's wide variety in terms of what people are doing, but you can really feel, just in terms of the consistency of attendance numbers that we get based on what cycle a class is in, there's a real culture to each of the reunion cycles. So I try to help classes think about what those are and the kinds of things they should be thinking about so that it can be successful, depending, again, which reunion cycle they're in.
I think I would have to imagine one of the things that impacts success is sort of managing expectations, right, when it comes to the volunteers and what they can anticipate. And I know that you guys take a look at previous year reunion data in order to help in the planning process. Could you explain a little bit about how you do that?
So we keep reunion attendance charts that break out for the past 10 years of, say, a 5th reunion or a 10th reunion, when, the rate with which people registered. So we break them out 10 weeks from reunion, 8 weeks from reunion, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, and then 3, 2, 1. And we show how many people are in your class versus other classes, say, in the 5th reunion cycle, the previous 10 years. And then we show how many people had registered at those different stages and what percentage that means of the class was registered at that point. And it helps them kind of predict how many people to expect, because they can look at those numbers in September and say, okay, so the past 3 5th reunions have had about 50 to 54% attendance. Our class size is this, so around 50% of our class is X, so we can expect this many people. But it also gives them a good sense of, once we're in the registration process, how their class is tracking, whether they are getting numbers that are higher than past years, and so they might need to plan for more people than perhaps expected, or if they're lagging behind and need to perhaps bump up communication efforts or think about outreach a little differently or more targeted ways. And so those are really good predictors, not just for the volunteers, but for our office, because we house people on campus, and there are certain realities just in terms of capacity of a campus meant for 2,000 people that is getting 3,000 plus bodies back to campus any reunion. So these kind of help everybody in the planning process, so we know how many people to expect.
Yeah, and I think that, I would imagine it to be a crucial component in the planning process, and the execution is to use that data to inform your communication plan. So that's great. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that one of the other components that we had fun talking about in our pre-show call is how student workers are a huge part of your reunion program. And can you talk a few minutes about in what ways students are deployed to make reunions at Williams a successful event?
Mm-hmm. So we have a reunion ranger program. So we call our student workers reunion rangers, and we hire now 50 plus students to work with our office during the weekend. And I actually hire somebody who manages them because there are so many of them, and we have to worry about housing them and feeding them and also managing their schedules. And they do everything from man our registration and register people, do face painting for kids, handing out class gifts, answering questions, to shuttling alumni around campus, to wearing the purple cow costume, which is our mascot, and wandering around campus. They help in any number of capacities. And part of the reason, so when I started this work in 2010, we actually usually only hired around 30 to 35. Some of that was because it's expensive. They wind up working more than 40 hours in that 4 days that they're working for us, so we're paying them overtime. And again, we're having to house them on campus and feed them for their extra time on campus. But what I have found is that alumni, when I get feedback, they speak very highly of the time that they get to spend with those rangers, whether it's, sitting in a shuttle or getting help from the rangers help unlock people if they lock themselves out of their rooms. But those conversations with students are some of the most meaningful and impactful moments that they have, because they get to see what the Williams of today is like through these student workers. And Williams has changed dramatically, especially for some of our classes, our post 50th classes, from what it once was. And so it's a really good chance for them to get a taste of what the student body is like now. And all the reunion rangers wear these really obnoxious bright orange shirts, so it's very apparent who the rangers are, who the workers are. And they're usually very outgoing, extroverted, friendly, kind people. And so we tell them to go to really talk to alums and engage them honestly about their experience at Williams if they're asked about it. And we found that that's some of the best way to spend our money, because it gives alums really a good sense of what the Williams of today is about. And they do so much of our grunt work for us as well, that it would not be possible to run reunion without them.
Important to have a little grunt work. And speaking of grunt work, I have a little boy myself. He's 2.5 years old, and I would imagine taking him to a reunion weekend along with my wife would be a exciting and challenging endeavor. And I know you guys have a pretty robust kids program. I think that probably most reunion programs attempt to have a kids program of some sort. Can you talk a little bit about what yours are, some of the elements of it?
Yep, so the main one is we call it our family activities program because it is really intended for families. It is not a babysitting service, this particular schedule. It is starting from an hour before the parade through the evening. We have a series of programs and activities on campus that are really geared towards families. Everything from planetarium shows in the evening with Professor from our astronomy department to doing purple crafts and getting their face painted and creating props for the parade, that morning, to soccer clinics with some of our reunion rangers who are on the soccer team. We've done bonfires. We have kids concerts. We have stuff at our museums, kids programs geared at our college museum where they're doing, a very family-centered and kid-specific kind of activity. So we have opportunities essentially all throughout Saturday, so that families, because we have a whole program running throughout the weekend and particularly on Saturday afternoon, but we want to make sure that many of those options are available again to alums coming back to campus with kids. And then we also, for the first time this year, launched something called the Purple Cow Camp, and it was in conjunction with the local community preschool that had the facilities. Is a wonderful resource for families in Williamstown, and so it's a way of supporting them and directing some resources to them, but also them supplying us with some help where they offered group babysitting and childcare from 6 p.m. till midnight during reunion in their facilities. And the older kids they took around campus, but they had the cots and they have all the insurance and stuff like that. So that was really successful, and I think alumni really appreciated having an affordable and relatively easy, it's right next to campus, opportunity for group babysitting for their kids. And so I think next year we'll offer that both Friday and Saturday evening as a babysitting option, because of course, people can bring babysitters to campus, but that can get expensive. We do offer the babysitters free housing, but still just traveling with a sitter can be expensive. And again, finding local sitters can be complicated for that many people. So I think having this group babysitting option was really, really successful in conjunction with having a very family-friendly reunion or campus-wide reunion program as well.
Fantastic. Great bits of advice in there, Ashley, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to open things up to both Jenna and Lisa at this time for any sort of parting thoughts based on our conversation today. Circling back, ladies, any sort of last bits of advice before we sign off? Well, if not, I will go ahead and sign off. And I would like to mention that iModules conference coming up, the 8th user conference, the Sizzler, is also introducing a new engagement strategies track, which featuring topics on sessions about strategic planning, online networking, events, mobile-ready sites, strategic consulting, and new profile pages, along with social media. So if you haven't had the chance to register for the iModules Sizzler conference, you're going to want to go ahead and do so as soon as possible. This is Ryan Catherwood coming to you live from University of Virginia. Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Advancement Live. I hope you'll come back again next time. Thank you. See ya.